This is Big Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. David Hooper with you. BigPodcast.com is the website, and this is the audio edition of my weekly newsletter. That newsletter, it is called Big Podcast Insider. On the last audio edition of the Big Podcast Insider episode, I mentioned having the conference crud. That conference crud turned out to be conference COVID. So I'm getting through it, man. I'm getting through it. Woo! Yeah, man. Not something good to have when you've got to use your voice. It is a wild, wild ride, I tell you that. I managed to avoid it for 3 years. Got all the vaccines, did everything that I was supposed to do, except, hang out with some people that obviously had it and gave it to me. So I've had about 7 days of restlessness and then complete exhaustion and a little neuropathy in my hands. Can't feel a thing. So that's a little bit scary. And maybe I'm breathing a little bit weird. It's so weird to go from, arguably in pretty good shape. I was working out every day to just walk around the block. So we'll see how I do here. On this episode, here's what I'm talking about. What would you do for money and attention? Podcasts on YouTube are here. 15 people on the most important question they've ever been asked. Google joins the AI wars. You paid how much for a mic? And also classified ads, some things that I think that you need to be aware of. This episode is brought to you by Riverside.fm. You've heard me talk about Riverside.fm. How do you get great sounding remote interviews? Well, Riverside.fm, that's one of the ways. It's the leading platform to record studio quality remote podcast and video. You can do this from anywhere. I do it worldwide. I do it from my closet here in Nashville. I go all over the place. It sounds like I'm in the same room, which is really good now because you don't want to be in the same room with me now that I've got COVID. 70,000 people and companies use Riverside.fm. I'm talking about companies like Spotify and the New York Times. It's got unbelievably high recording quality, regardless of you or your guest internet quality. It does what we call a double ender. It records things locally. Then, once it's recorded, throws everything up on the cloud. You take it down from the cloud. You can edit it, make it sound however you want to. Like I said, you're going to sound like you're in the same room. And here is how to get it for free. That's the trial. 2 hours for free. Riverside.fm. If you want to keep it, and I think you're going to want to because you're going to sound so good. Big Podcast. That's the code. BIGPODCAST. Riverside.fm. The code 15% off. Big Podcast. BIGPODCAST. Everything that I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go from thing to thing to thing. All the elements of this episode that I mentioned earlier, I'm going to go. Boom, boom, boom. Trying to get done with this episode before I have to take another nap because of this COVID. In between segments, I'm going to play this sound. That's how you know I'm going from one story to the next. What would you do for money and attention? I'm not a golfer, but I love the story of Live Golf. It's an organization financed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is their version of the PGA. They're trying to compete with the PGA. They said it was created by the monarchy to sports wash its corruption and human rights abuses. They have been great at getting attention. They came on the scene with a ton of money. They offered massive paydays to established golfers to get them to step away from the PGA. How often does that happen? That should sound familiar to you. It's happened and it's happening with podcasting. And like so many podcasting companies, Live is finding out that getting attention is different than keeping attention. This is something I want you to consider before doing one of these deals. But that's not why I bring this up. I bring this up to say these deals, they are out there. If you stick around podcasting long enough, you're probably going to have the opportunity to participate in one. I haven't seen anything as controversial as Live in podcasting, but depending on your morals, there are a couple things that are arguably close. I'll give you an example. This was just a couple of weeks ago. I had a recruiter approach me about working for a top podcasting company that I would classify as a major producer of hate speech. Just for the record, I walked away because I don't want anything to do with that. I don't make content that hurts the people that I love. But that's where things get tricky because we have a way of convincing ourselves that companies aren't so bad or we could do a lot of good with that money. We're seeing this right now with this Nashville school shooting. Talked a little bit about this on the last episode, the half episode, just letting you know that this one would be late. The politicians that we have representing us in Tennessee, including our governor, including Senator Marsha Blackburn, paid off by the NRA. Of course, that's influential. Money is influential. When you hear me talk about Riverside, you don't think that influences me? Yes. Yes. Please. Don't act like it doesn't. Money influences. And I'm not saying not to take it. I'm no Sunday school teacher. I'm not here to be judge and jury when it comes to your content and how you make a living. But I do suggest that you get clear on what you're willing to do for money now, before that money's presented to you. When the money is presented to you, that's going to make decisions about it so much easier. Here's what I want for you. I want for you to have options. I want to make it so that you never have to take any money that you're not 100% on board with. That's the purpose of Big Podcast Insider, the newsletter at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That is the purpose of this podcast. I want to give you options. If somebody comes up to you and they want to give you a ton of money and you are in alignment with that company, yeah, man, I'm going to high five you on that. Cool, dude, take it. Take it. If it's a match for you, do it. But I don't want you to get in trouble taking some money and then having to do some things because you took that money. And we are seeing that right now in Tennessee with our local, state, and federal politicians. They took some money and they're having to pay the piper. I do not want to see you in that kind of situation if you are not 100% on board with the money that you took. If you got stories about money that you took or you didn't take, I would love to hear them. I want to showcase them here. And I'm talking good, bad, and ugly. Money you didn't take, money you should have taken, money you wish you hadn't taken. Reach out to me via Twitter or Mastodon. All the links, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Podcasts on YouTube are here. I've got a video. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. It will show you how to set things up. Right now, I got to laugh about this, man. Set things up. What they're calling a podcast, it's actually a playlist. So you're probably already set up with it. It's simply organizing your podcast episodes into a playlist. Maybe they've already done that for you. I think probably what's happening, because they know what's in your videos, they can listen to us, watch us, analyze us, whatever. You know how they do the automatic transcriptions? Well, yeah, they know what's in the videos that you do. So they probably already know that you've got a podcast coming from Libsyn or coming from your provider automatically to YouTube. They're putting it automatically in a playlist, or as they call a podcast. Everybody's making a big deal about it. People are excited about the discoverability of YouTube. Will that move into the podcasting world? I don't know. Stargate Pioneer from Better Podcasting had a good thing to say. It says the term podcast is no longer owned by the true podcast space with RSS feeds and Apple Music. The public at large thinks podcast is synonymous with show. And I would agree with that. Sometimes you'll see the hardcore podcasters, the guys like me, been around for a while since the mid-2000s. By God, it's not a podcast if it doesn't have an RSS feed. Who cares? As far as the audience goes, if they think a YouTube show is a podcast, look, let them call it a podcast. Who cares? Keep doing your show. But this is right. The term podcast, no longer owned by the true podcast space with RSS feeds and Apple Music. So even though the YouTube podcasts maybe aren't real podcasts, who cares? Let's let them call it a podcast. Andrew from Podcastage says, for the average consumer, podcast is synonymous with long-form spoken word content. Kind of the same thing, right? What we call a podcast, and I would say podcast, there have been video podcasts since day one, but I would think of it as audio, comes down via RSS. That's what I think. I think it's radio on demand, basically. People don't think of it like that. Let them think whatever they think. Regardless, if you're interested in putting your podcast up on YouTube, that is an option for you. You can get in early. I've got the video that shows you exactly how to do it. More information at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. 15 people, the most important question they've ever been asked. The questions in this story, and I've got a list of them, they're interesting. Probably only a couple of them are things you haven't heard or thought of before. You're an interviewer. You're asking questions all the time. You're like, yeah, okay, great. I ask those every interview. Okay, great. So it's not going to be really deep when you talk about the most important question somebody has ever been asked. I think you'll get some ideas for interview questions that you could ask during your interviews, but I don't think there are any magic bullets that will guarantee a great interview. Far more interesting for podcasters is the advice that is shared on how to ask great questions. Like I said, there's not a magic bullet question, like that one question you can ask and every single time it's a great interview. That doesn't exist. What makes a great interview is really three things. First thing is preparation. You going in knowing about the guest, you knowing about the topic, you knowing what to ask, what your listeners want you to ask. The second thing, active listening. We've all heard those interviews where somebody's just going down the list. What's your favorite success quote? It's what I call the Casey Kasem death dedication. You've heard that clip. You're coming out of this upbeat number, going into a death dedication. It doesn't work. You've got to have active listening so you don't have those train wrecks from going from question to question to question. You're asking your questions based on what was just said, modifying them if needed, skipping them if needed, moving them around if needed, leading that guest and your listener on a journey that makes them want to listen, engage, go deeper. Active listening, and then responding to that active listening. The third thing, anecdotes. Give you some thoughts on each. One of the best ways to prepare for an interview, I call it a pre-interview. It's a short phone call. I do it a few days before the interview. I introduce myself. Hey, I'm David. I'll be interviewing you on Tuesday. Just wanted to introduce myself. This is making the guest feel comfortable. It's making it so, hey, it's David. I'm going to ask you all these questions. Boom, 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 boom. And somebody has to build rapport with me. No, we've had this small conversation, 10, 15 minutes. I've already introduced myself. I've already answered questions. Let people know what we're going to talk about, more or less, not giving them the exact questions, but maybe the topics. Here's what I'm thinking about. And also getting to know them, getting to know their story. Hey, I'm excited about interviewing you. Is there anything you want to cover? Is there anything you think is unique about yourself that nobody asked you about that maybe I should talk about? See if I can work something like that in. It's super casual. It's just a way for you to build rapport with people, find out a little bit something about them without having the pressure of that camera on or that recording button on. That gets people nervous. Red light syndrome. I see it all the time. You know, my radio show, Music Business Radio, it's not uncommon for me to have a president of a record label in, well-known producer. These are big, successful people when it comes to producing music or releasing music. That red light goes on, they're like, And I'm thinking, what are you nervous about, man? I'm not the one who sold 20 million records. You are. I should be nervous talking to you. Yet they get nervous because that red light is on. That happens, and it doesn't take much to make somebody nervous. You can help mitigate that, lower those nerves by doing this pre-interview. And that third thing that I'm talking about, the anecdotes, that could be something just casual. That could be something, hey, you and I went to the same high school. Hey, you and I grew up in the same area of the country. Hey, you and I like burritos. I don't know. You never know when you're going to use that stuff, but you can bring it up, build rapport, have a laugh, use it to get to the next question, use it to relax somebody. I've got more thoughts on this, including a plan for what to do if a guest doesn't want to do a pre-interview. That's linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. But remember the process. It comes down to three things. 1, preparation. 2, active listening. 3, anecdotes. But for those 15 people with the most important question they've ever been asked, might give you some ideas. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Google joins the AI wars. Google has its own version of ChatGPT. It's called Bard. I've got the link for you to get on the waiting list. It is at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Here's how they describe it. Meet Bard, your creative and helpful collaborator, here to supercharge your imagination, boost your productivity, and bring your ideas to life. Let me give you my thoughts on AI tools for podcasters. Cast Magic, talked about it on the last episode. Swell AI, I've talked about that on the last episode. Specific podcast solutions are the best ways for podcasters to use AI for podcasting. Each of these tools, they will take your audio, they will give you episode notes. Swell AI gives you an article. They give you social media posts, title ideas. They're going to break down what you've already got and give you content that you can actually use to promote your podcast episode. That is very helpful. Bard, just like ChatGPT, that can help you do research. Is it better than pre-interview? Probably not, but it's not bad. I've had it a few days, still in the experimental mode. As good as ChatGPT, I'm going to say no. It sounds like a generic writer without any specialized knowledge, no personality. That's not what we do with podcasting, at least not what you should be doing. You should be bringing personality into your podcast. I should feel you when I listen to your podcast. I should know who you are, not just what you were saying. Bard's not necessarily doing that. Again, experimental. Maybe it's going to get better. You can get on the list. Check it out yourself. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. And by the way, if you think, what am I going to do with AI for a podcast? I've got 7 ways to use it for episode production. Also linked. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You paid how much for a mic? Last weekend, I was at Rockin' Pod. Saw a guy. I think car owners are this way. You drive a certain type of car, say you're a Mercedes owner. See another guy with a Mercedes, you kind of give him a nod. Oh, man, you got good taste in cars. That's how I feel when I see a guy with a good mic. This guy had an RE20. I waited till he was done. I wasn't just going to go right up to him. But you know, you're on the trade show floor. A lot of guys with the lower end mics. A lot of people bring in SM58s because it's a rock and roll conference, right? SM58, a great rock and roll mic for stage. And it's a great mic for noisy places like Rockin' Pod. So these guys had these SM58s out, except for one. He's got the RE20. Waited till he was done. I said, you, sir, have excellent taste in mics. And he told me the story of how he found it. He goes, yeah, man, I picked this up for only a couple $100. I said, what? That's less than half of what you'd normally spend. The joke is at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You paid how much for a mic? That joke. But I'm mentioning this here to say that if you're looking to upgrade your mic right now, March and April, a perfect time for you to find a good deal on a mic. This is how mics work and just podcasting equipment works. We all start at the beginning of the year. We've got these big plans. We buy a bunch of new stuff. Maybe we use it. Maybe we don't. Maybe it's not what we need. For whatever reason, we're selling it. It's a good chance for people like you looking for a deal. You want to upgrade your stuff? Get yourself a used mic. This dude, $200. I'd buy RE20s, $200 all day long. If nothing else, because I could sell them for $300 all day long. Give me a little side hustle. I've got more information on this. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, one more thing before I go. I'll mention Swell AI. SwellAI.com. You can use Swell AI to automate your podcast episode summaries, time-stamped episode highlights, and long-form articles based on the content of your episodes. Upload your audio. Swell AI does the rest. I've got everything linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Shorter episode this time. Thank you for sticking it out with me. Glad to be back on the mic. Had to take over a week off recording anything because I just felt so bad. COVID is no joke, guys. It's still going around. It affects us as radio and podcasting people disproportionately. I was very, very lucky to have an interview that was in person canceled on me last week. I was going to have 4 people in there. They really wanted me in the studio for it. The guest fortunately canceled. I had no idea I had this. I would have brought this in with me. And the other 3 people in that room with me, the guest, the engineer, the producer, they would have all walked out with this. It is no joke. I have had 7 days of very hard symptoms. Like I said, I've got some neuropathy going on. Can't feel my fingers. Couldn't feel my toes yesterday. Breathing. You can hear my breathing is a little bit weird. Voice is a little bit weird. I'm tired as hell. Already taken 2 naps today and I slept over 8 hours. I can finally sleep though. I'm thankful for that because the first few nights, waking up probably about every hour, wasn't getting a whole lot of sleep and it's just awful. Get vaxxed, take care of yourself, wear a mask, do what you need to do. It is no joke. I know a lot of people, man, it's just a cold. Okay, you can tell yourself that, man. You can tell yourself that. But again, people in our business, radio, podcasting, we are being affected disproportionately by it. A lot of people on the right wing side of what we do. I think you guys have been drinking the Kool-Aid, and I know some people have died because of it. I don't want you to end up there. Do your research, go remote where you can, and protect yourself. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you want to subscribe to this podcast, make sure you do not miss an episode. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That is how to do it. I've got a button for iPhone, Android, got an RSS button, and QR code. You can scan it. Woo! Go straight from my computer to your phone. Listen to me wherever you are, in the car, in the gym, when you're walking around with your iPhone in your ear, whatever. I'm not going to judge you. I've got it all laid out for you. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Do it now before you forget. It is free. And if it doesn't work for you, we'll go our separate ways. No hard feelings. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast, and I'll see you on the next episode.